Jack had been a compulsive worrier for years. It was ruining his life. A psychologist recommended a specialist who could help him. Jack's friend Bob noticed a dramatic change and asked, "What happened? Nothing seems to worry you anymore." "I hired a professional worrier and I haven't had a worry since," replied Jack. "That must be expensive," Bob said. "He charges $10,000 a month," Jack told him. $10,000, Bob exclaimed. "How in the world can you afford to pay him?" "I don't know," said Jack. "That's his problem." Wouldn't it be great if we could outsource our worries? Some claim worrying is a Jewish cultural characteristic, citing the classic Jewish telegram, "Start worrying, details to follow," and the Jewish headstone inscription, "I told you I was sick." This belief is often attributed to the millennia of oppression Jews have suffered. On a positive note, social psychologist Leonard Sachs sees anxiety about the future as a positive Jewish trait. As he put it, "In this fakakta world, that's a healthy response." Even if worrying is a Jewish proclivity, and there are matters of particular Jewish concern, it's hardly an exclusive trait. How could it be otherwise? Aside from personal concerns for oneself or loved ones, which are universal, each day's news brings a cavalcade of calamities and a host of looming dangers, some potentially existential. Among them is climate change. Glaciers, polar ice sheets, and the permafrost are melting. Sea levels are rising and oceans are warming. Wildfires and the dangerous air they generate are more intense. Droughts last longer, storms are stronger, floods are more violent, temperatures break records, and swelling heat waves grow deadlier. Climate change impacts everything: weather, the environment, economies, animals, agriculture, and human health. It exacerbates inequalities and displaces populations. The UN Climate Report concludes, "Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss the brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future." Today's climate upheavals are a preview of catastrophic coming attractions, but a sense of urgency seems lacking, except among young people. Almost half of them say high climate anxiety affects their daily lives. One 16-year-old said, "It's different for us. For us, the destruction of the planet is personal." It's also a matter of ultimate Jewish concern. Midrash says God told Adam, "Take care not to damage or destroy my world. If you do, there will be no one after you to repair it." This chilling warning resonates across the ages. Climate aside, we face a different type of tsunami, a toxic torrent of bigotry, hatred, and violence. These expressions of social pathology are not new, but they are newly virulent. As extremist ideologies and conspiracy theories metastasize, political violence becomes normalized, and the threat of domestic terrorism grows. Underground hate groups, white supremacists, paramilitary movements, and other fanatics with histories of violence once had limited reach. Now they deploy extensive websites, many targeted at youth. As extremism becomes decentralized, individuals are radicalized via online networks. Social media platforms prioritize inflammatory content and fail to protect targets of hate and harassment. For all its positives, the web is a toxic waste dump, and the internet is the most potent means of propagating hate since the invention of the printing press. Among the world's hatreds, anti-Semitism is the oldest and most enduring. The ADL reports that incidents of harassment, bomb threats, vandalism, and assault targeting Jewish individuals and communities, including young children and teachers, reached records levels last year. Anti-Semitic propaganda floods the internet, as Jew hatred and technology coalesce. An especially pernicious practice is doxing, publishing someone's personal information online to unleash a flood of threatening messages and phone calls. In one egregious case, a notorious anti-Semite targeted a Montana realtor with children, urging his followers, tell them you are sickened by their Jew agenda. And hey, if you're in the area, maybe you should stop by and tell her in person what you think of her actions. Sadly, but not surprisingly, anti-Semitism is a worldwide phenomenon on both right and left. In recent years, anti-Jewish incidents occurred in at least 94 countries, including Germany. Hateful words can have tragic consequences. The perpetrator of the 2018 Tree of Life massacre, the deadliest attack on Jews in U.S. history, was triggered by the Great Replacement, a conspiracy theory that the white race is in danger of extinction by a rising tide of non-white people controlled and manipulated by Jews. This preposterous delusion is the source of the "Jews will not replace us" chant at neo-Nazi rallies. At trial, a psychiatrist testified the killer hoped his case would garner widespread attention and inspire imitators. Another anti-Semite posted photos of witnesses online, including victims, and threatened to track down the jurors. Since the bloodbath, 1 in 4 American Jews reportedly hide their Jewish identity or modify their behavior, online or off, from fear of anti-Semitism. When you were growing up, did you ever imagine that synagogues would need elaborate security systems, armed guards, and active shooter training? Neither did I. Internet bigotry has also spiked against blacks, Muslims, and the LGBTQ community. This is not occurring in a vacuum. The ADL links it to inflammatory rhetoric by political leaders, celebrities, and other public figures, and highly charged disputes over reproductive and transgender rights, racial justice, and voting access. Transgender persons are by far the group most targeted for hate and harassment. According to the Human Rights Campaign, hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced and more than 75 have become law. Among the most cruel are anti-trans laws, like the one the Ohio House passed, that outlaw and criminalize potentially life-saving medical and psychological care to minors who suffer from gender dysphoria, a conflict between one's sex assigned at birth and one's gender identity, a medically recognized conflict. These laws deny access even to puberty-blocking medications that buy kids time to figure things out before their bodies preempt them. The proponents of these laws are apparently so lacking in empathy, they cannot imagine how it feels to have a desperately miserable child, and so arrogant as to believe they know better than parents and physicians what care their children need. These callous, cynical efforts weaponize bigotry. They exploit the most vulnerable, isolated, tormented, and ostracized young people in our society, their parents, and others for political gain. The issue transcends politics. Jewish tradition insists that every person is created in God's image, unique, irreplaceable, endowed with dignity, and entitled to justice and compassion. As Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik taught, it is a primary Jewish obligation to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone. The malignant spread of hate online and its devastating real-world impacts will soon grow exponentially. Artificial intelligence will amplify the internet's worst abuses and allow all manner of wrongdoing to reach proportions previously unimaginable. AI will supercharge disinformation, scams, deepfakes, and cyber attacks of all kinds, potentially including surreptitious altering of election outcomes and endanger what little is left of personal privacy. Already, we are woefully ill-prepared for future pandemics. AI research in synthetic biology will magnify the risk of creating antibiotic-resistant superbugs, and one person's lab accident is another's terrorist weapon. To be fair, AI has many potential benefits too. I went to the source and asked ChatGPT what they are, and instantly received an impressive list. Nonetheless, many experts believe AI poses profound risks to society and humanity. The CEO of OpenAI admits, "I try to be upfront. Am I doing something good or really bad?" Some dismiss these fears as alarmist and exaggerated, but two fundamental problems are undeniable. Abuses of technology have historically outpaced our ability to manage it. And, as Google's CEO has admitted, AI will be as good or evil as human nature allows. For the past year, my most intense worldly concern has been about Israel. As some will recall, I have spoken on many high holy days of my devotion to Israel. I've upheld its right to exist and defend itself, warned of Iran's genocidal nuclear ambitions, and rebutted the lies, hypocrisy, and unjust criticism of Israel's detractors. I've marveled at its incomparable beauty and vibrant culture, its medical, scientific, and technological innovations, lively democracy, and worldwide humanitarian missions. I have celebrated its miraculous rebirth, its survival against unrelenting enemies, and its open door for Jews fleeing danger or persecution or seeking deeper fulfillment. I have emphasized our sacred obligation to maintain a supportive connection with Israel. I stand by every word. But our love, loyalty, and support are for the state, land, and people of Israel, not any particular government, leaders, or policies. The distinction is especially critical now when political extremists and radical ideologues are in its cabinet, and a narrow Knesset majority seeks to neuter Israel's judiciary and enact a host of other divisive measures. Israel's Supreme Court is the sole check on the abuse of power and government corruption, and the protector of human, civil, women's, and minority rights. Negating its independence would create a monopoly of governmental powers and foster a tyranny of the majority. To be sure, not all advocates of judicial changes are extremist, corrupt, or possess ulterior motives. Many sensible Israelis support reforms, and there is a widespread agreement that some are needed, but only after thorough dialogue and consensus, not by unilateral imposition. As you likely know, the coalition passed the first element of its plan, stripping the Supreme Court of authority to overrule government actions it deems extremely unreasonable. In wake of the vote, peaceful protests intensified. Thousands of reservists upon whom Israel's national security depends, including pilots who daily risk their lives, declared unwillingness to serve an undemocratic government. The outflow of investment capital accelerated, major credit rating agencies downgraded Israel, and internet searches for information on leaving the country increased by 28%. The political turmoil cast a pall over Israel's 75th anniversary. One journalist wrote, "Celebrating it felt like popping a bottle of champagne at the scene of a car crash." Other reactions ranged from apocalyptic to optimistic. Dismayed and emotional Daniel Gordis wrote, "Israel's society as we knew it has been murdered." Bret Stephens called lamentations about the end of democracy hyperbolic, but called the vote a true disaster for Israel because it risks depriving the country of its most potent weapon, the fierce loyalty of its most productive and civically engaged citizens. Rabbi Daniel Hartman, an optimist, dismisses naysayers like Tom Friedman, and says the fight for democracy is far from over, and the demonstrations have united a new Israeli consensus. And he predicts the current right-wing government will be the last of its kind. Israel has weathered other crises and managed tensions between being a Jewish state and a democratic one without imploding. But this one feels qualitatively different. The danger of authoritarian rule, a disastrous constitutional crisis, or even civil war, however unlikely, cannot be dismissed lightly. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace points out that where democracies reach pernicious levels of polarization, the most common outcome is some form of major democratic decline. And Freedom House, an independent watchdog, reports the U.S., too, has fallen below its peers on key democratic indicators. It adds, countries that have struggled between democracy and authoritarianism are increasingly tilting toward the latter. Clearly, in both Israel and the United States, democracy is seriously challenged. In Tom Stoppard's stunning play Leopoldstadt, Nathan Fishbein, among the few Holocaust survivors of his formerly complacent Austrian family, tells his apathetic, hyper-assimilated cousin Leo, "You live as if without history, as if you throw no shadow behind you." Jews, Israelis, and Americans who ignore history and indulge in complacency do so at our peril. I don't mean to imply another Holocaust is on the horizon, but there are many bad outcomes for Jews short of genocide. And historian Simon Schama shows that every flourishing Jewish community in history that felt safe and secure ultimately ended badly. Daniel Gordis, too, offers an ominous 75th anniversary history lesson that Israel's two prior periods of national sovereignty both lasted less than 80 years due to Jewish disunity. Finally, while the 20th century may have been the American century, there is no assurance that this or future ones will be, since every former empire eventually fell. Anyone who isn't worrying had better start. The details are before our eyes. And of course, whatever our worldly worries, we each have personal concerns, much more immediate and at times urgent. A friend or loved one's health or our own, financial setbacks, family conflict, problems a child or grandchild is having, the kind of things that cause us sleepless nights, the hardest worries of all to set aside. Our particular issues will always take precedence, but anxiety about the world's woes can make coping with our own even more difficult. None of us has unlimited bandwidth. Whatever distresses you most on the personal or cosmic level, we all face the same challenge, making our way in a worrisome world. One perspective on this challenge is found in the book of Ecclesiastes. Its author, Kohelet, is elderly, bored, and cynical. To him, life is wearisome, meaningless, and repetitive, utter futility. He concludes, there is nothing worthwhile to do but eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of your labor with one you love. Judaism rejects this demoralizing view. Kohelet is not entirely wrong. He understands that pleasant experiences make life difficulties easier to bear. But in claiming that nothing but enjoyment is worthwhile, he goes astray. As the Torah insists, we do not live on bread alone. And as the prophet Jeremiah demanded of one high-living ancient king, did not your father eat and drink, yet do what was just and right, and then it was well with him? Enjoyment is good, even encouraged and on occasion commanded, but not to the exclusion of our ethical obligations. And even more valuable than enjoyment is joy, living mindfully and experiencing the small joys of everyday living, transforming mundane moments into meaningful ones. Millennia before cell phones and computers, Our tradition knew that nonstop worry is corrosive to both body and soul. So it insists we take time to detoxify, to devote a day each week to rest, peace, and spiritual renewal, as if all were right with the world. It calls that day Shabbat. And when it ends, we return to productive labor and the unshirkable task of the world's repair. Just as pleasing aromas stimulate the senses, setting burdens aside for a time arouses a keener awareness of our blessings and deepens a sense of gratitude. Gratitude is among Judaism's most passionate imperatives. The very first words of our daily liturgy are, thank you. We express thanks to God for renewing our lives, our souls, the grandeur of nature and the orderly operation of the universe, the gift of Torah, the privilege of performing mitzvot, the miracles and goodness we experience daily. One beautiful prayer expresses wonderment at the body's intricate design, its many pathways and openings. How well we know, it says, that if even one that's supposed to close stays open, or vice versa, we could not endure. This blessing is also recited for going to the bathroom. Anyone who has ever been unable to go or to stop, and who hasn't, can understand how wrong it is to take our body's functioning for granted or fail to be thankful for it. In Judaism, even grief occasions gratitude. Though Kaddish is a memorial prayer, it makes no mention of death. It is an affirmation of life, a profound thanks for the gift of our loved ones' lives and our own. Gratitude is more than a passing feeling or mood. It is an active, everyday state of awareness. Professor Joel Wong of Indiana University offers a list of 100 questions to help us reflect on what we're grateful for and to whom. A sample. What are some good things I've taken for granted? What went well this week? What do I appreciate about my spouse or partner? What is something bad that could have happened but didn't? One author suggests writing down a few things we're grateful for each night in a gratitude journal. Research shows that a grateful outlook and expressing gratitude to others can have positive effects on our emotional, psychological, and physical health. Gratitude is the gift that keeps on giving. Gratitude can't solve personal problems, but it helps us keep them in proportion. When I find myself preoccupied with worry, I try to pause and reframe. I make a mental list of things and people I'm grateful for, and silently thank God, the source of blessings, for all that is good in my life. And I tell myself, whatever may happen tomorrow, today is a good day. A sense of proportion is much needed with global worries, too. Our planet may seem to be in a death spiral, but some things have actually gotten better. There have been dramatic declines in global poverty and hunger, deaths in pregnancy and childbirth and child mortality, and improvements in life expectancy, education and literacy, access to technology, gender equality, and despite COVID, even health. The world is endangered, but it is not doomed, nor is humanity, Israel, the United States, or the Jewish people. Worst-case scenarios are terrifying, but don't usually happen. Michael J. Fox counsels us not to spend time imagining the worst, because if by some fluke it ensues, we will have lived it twice. Despite rampant hatred, Camus' observation rings true, that we learn in a time of pestilence, there are more things to admire in people than to despise. Yes, anti-Semitism is rife. The danger it poses is real, and sadly, enhanced security is necessary. But the answer is not to downplay our identity. It is to celebrate it openly and proudly, not to curtail our Jewish engagement, but to deepen it. Yes, Jewish history is replete with horrors, but not everything is heading in the wrong direction. An example. When Richard I was crowned King of England in 1189, a group of Jewish dignitaries who brought him gifts were stripped, whipped, and banished from the court. Anti-Jewish pogroms broke out in numerous cities and towns with appalling cruelty and barbarity. Last spring, then Prince Charles hosted the Orthodox chief rabbi of Britain at St. James Palace overnight so he could walk to the coronation, which was taking place on Shabbat, and provided a kosher caterer. Fearing for the Jewish future is an age-old phenomenon. As philosopher Simon Ravitowitz observed in a 1948 essay, The Ever-Dying People. Yet he saw our collective anxiety as a source of strength. Jewish history, he wrote, represents a phenomenon that has almost no parallel in mankind's story. A people that has been disappearing constantly for the last 2,000 years, exterminated in dozens of lands all over the globe, reduced to half or a third its population by tyrants, ancient and modern. But Jewish life, he continued, still exists, falls and rises, loses all its possessions and re-equips itself for a new start, a second, a third chance, always fearing the end, never afraid to make a new beginning. The modern state of Israel is just such a beginning. Democracy in Israel is imperiled, but the hundreds of thousands of citizen demonstrators proudly displaying the blue on white national flag are a sign of its vitality, and the judicial overhaul may yet be shelved, curtailed, invalidated, or repealed by a future government. The Jewish state is far from realizing its noblest aspirations, but despite the conflict, it has unlimited potential to be developed, and there is plenty to celebrate. Far too many have endured, sacrificed, and achieved far too much for us to give up on Israel. It is the most monumental Jewish achievement in 2 millennia and indispensable to the Jewish people's future wherever we live. Instead of wringing our hands over Israel, we should fervently support efforts to make it better. The world's problems, are so numerous and so vast, we often feel powerless, but we are not. Time is short, but it is not too late to address them if the will is summoned. As the inspiring nonprofit Facing History and Ourselves reminds us, people make choices, and choices make history. Rather than be bystanders, we can choose to be upstanders. Engagement and advocacy, the sustained investment of our time, energy, talents, and resources, finding and serving purposes larger than ourselves, are powerful antidotes to anxiety and make a meaningful difference. All things considered, should we be optimistic, hopeful? Rabbi Jonathan Sacks distinguished the two, writing, "Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better." The prophet Zechariah called our people prisoners of hope, and the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai wrote, "We are infected with hope." Od lo avda tikvatenu, ha-tikva bat shnot alpayim. Our hope of 2,000 years has not been lost. Ours is a religion of hope, and we are a people of hope, but not of hope alone. Committed action is Jewish hope's inseparable life partner. For Jews, optimism is optional, but righteous acts, gratitude, and hope are sacred obligations, especially in a worrisome world. And lest we forget, God too has hopes, high hopes, and places them in us. in the new year and always. Let's be grateful, keep hoping, and get to work. Gemar Chatima Tova.